Hello viewers, welcome to our program for today. The Prince and the Pauper, a classic novel titled by Mark Twain. In part 1, we discuss the theme and the summary of this classic novel, throwing light on the theme of switched identities. In continuation of part 1, in today's class we shall discuss the novel as a social satire. We will also discuss and examine the characters, the major and the minor, who contribute individually to make this novel successful. The Prince and the Pauper is not just a classic read by children, but it is a historical novel which echoes moral truths. Through this novel, Twain exposes the hypocrisy and inhumanity of the aristocracy. The Prince and the Pauper, seemingly a simple novel, handles several divergent themes and ideas simultaneously. Foremost is the basic idea of the exchange of roles and lives between the Prince and the Pauper, and the constant reference to their twin fates. Prior to meeting each other, both boys have dreams of living the life of the other, but the dreams of each are shattered as a result of the exchange. Both are in a sense innocents who learn a great deal about life as a result of their exchanging clothes and roles. Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper is a novel which deals with the reversal of roles of two children and their adventures in a strange world. It particularly focuses our attention on England during the 16th century, a period of tremendous religious upheavals and despotic rule. Henry VIII was an insensitive ruler who punished his subjects severely for petty crimes. The laws of the land were harsh and superstitions prevailed, clouding rational thinking. Through the novel, Mark Twain shows the inequalities that existed between the rich and the poor. Mark Twain's fictional, colorfully written novel, The Prince and the Pauper, depicts Twain's perception of the oppression of English life under the rule of King Henry VIII. In his autobiography, Twain wrote of this novel, Edward VI and a little pauper exchange places by accident a day or so before Henry VIII's death. The prince wanders in rags and hardship, and the pauper suffers to him the horrible miseries of princedom up to the moment of crowning in Westminster Abbey, when the proof is brought and the mistake is rectified. From this bare sketch, Twain fleshed out the characters and created a masterpiece that has endured and delighted thousands of young readers and adults alike ever since its publication in 1882. The Prince and the Pauper has a range of characters that contribute to the novel. Each of the main characters in the novel has strong character exhibiting the same value system Twain holds dear. His main characters remain moral throughout the book, despite the presentation of opportunities to commit evil acts. Mark Twain began writing The Prince and the Pauper in 1877. His inspiration for the novel came from Charlotte M. Yonge's The Little Duke, set in the 10th century France, in which the young Richard of Normandy becomes more compassionate and wise ruler after his father is murdered, and he experiences a series of harrowing adventures in the world. The novel is set in 16th century England during the reign of Henry VIII, a time when the gulf between the rich and the poor was vast. A cruel, autocratic ruler, Henry VIII was intolerant of religious freedoms and imposed harsh and unjust punishments on his subjects. During this period, the rich lived in the lap of luxury while the poor struggled to survive. Royalty and lords and ladies had vast wealth, whereas the poor literally starved on the streets. There was very little social justice and virtually no social mobility. The Prince and the Pauper is set in the 16th century England, a time of harsh, unjust laws and severe punishment for petty crimes. The novel's action takes place in London and the surrounding countryside, with the scene continually shifting between the splendor of the royal palace and the filth of the underworld. Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales and son of Henry VIII, lives in the palace at Westminster, while Tom Canty, a beggar and the son of a drunkard, John Canty, lives in a tiny and dirty pocket of London called Offalcourt. Through a chance encounter, the two boys exchange roles and experience life as the other. The action takes place in and around London, with a sharp contrast between the mean, dirty streets and the royal palace. In this novel, Twain focuses particularly on the many social injustices which are exposed to the new king as he roams in his land as a common pauper. The subject matter also allowed Twain to indulge in one of his favorite pastimes, using a language different from that used by either the common people or the educated people. The theme of integrity is developed throughout The Prince and the Pauper, a theme which reflects upon Mark Twain's character. Mark Twain was highly influenced by W.E.H. Lecky's History of European Morals, which held that over time society became less barbaric through each individual's experience and education. Twain tried to communicate this idea of progressiveness of history in The Prince and the Pauper. Tom is saved through both his experience and education, which prepare him for the role he is forced to play. Edward is also saved through his education among the poor and downtrodden of England. The suffering that both boys undergo make them effective and benevolent rulers. Tom, in his brief reign, begins to enact reforms, and Edward, once he regains the throne, proves true to his word and rules his kingdom with mercy. The prevailing mood of the novel is serious, as the story is set in the 16th century England under the reign of the autocratic ruler Henry VIII. However, Mark Twain lightens the atmosphere of the novel considerably with his masterstrokes of irony, creating humorous scenes and eccentric characters to amuse and entertain readers. The Prince and the Pauper is one of Twain's most tightly plotted novels. In addition, the novel is strongly thematic. Thematically, Twain is particularly interested in contrasting the lives of the rich and the lives of the poor, the lives of the nobility with the lives of the lower classes. At the same time, however, Twain is also interested in showing that the person of a noble birth is not essentially different from a person of common birth, even though their lives may seem to be different. In other words, he wishes to show that the prince dressed in pauper's clothing will be treated as a prince. In addition, the pauper can do the prince's job very nearly as well as the prince could if the pauper is given the chance. The two main characters in The Prince and the Pauper are, of course, Tom Canty and Edward Tudor. Because these two boys are the main characters, they also carry the main burden of advancing both the theme and the plot. The theme and the plot require the lives of these boys to be contrasted to show that the life of one is very different from the life of the other. This requirement is met by having one of the boys as a prince, a person whose life has been extremely guarded and luxurious, and having the other boy as a pauper, a person from the lowest ranks of society whose life has been very hard. In order to contrast the lives of these two boys most clearly and effectively, then the natural choice is to choose one boy from each of the society's extremes. In this novel, Edward Tudor has been raised in luxury. On the other hand, Tom Canty has been raised in extreme poverty. The theme of the novel requires that although these two characters must be accustomed to different ways of life, they must also be similar in nearly all other respects. Thus, they must also look alike, so much alike that people can easily mistake one for the other. Therefore, Tom Canty and Edward Tudor have the same coloring, the same height, the same weight and facial features. In addition to their youth, this aspect of the theme of the novel requires that they share other characteristics as well. Thus, both Edward and Tom are intelligent, kind-hearted, ready to recognize injustice and cruelty, willing to reward service and alleviate need, and be able to learn from their experiences. Flat characters have only those characteristics required by the plot and the theme. The characters in The Prince and the Pauper are flat characters. They were created to advance the plot of the novel and to develop the thematic points that Twain wanted to suggest to his audience. In short, each of the characteristics shown by Edward and by Tom is either required by the plot or the theme, or both by the theme and the plot. Miles Hendon is another character whose characteristics meet requirements set by the plot and by the theme of the novel. Nevertheless, although they are rounded individuals, people remember Tom Canty and Edward Tudor because of the characteristics they do have and because of the roles they play in the action of this novel. We now move to the next segment where we discuss the major characters in this novel, that is, Tom Canty and Edward Tudor. We begin with Edward Tudor. He is the Prince of Wales and the son of King Henry VIII, King of England. Born to a life of luxury and affluence, he is nevertheless gentle and compassionate prince. As a prince, Edward is pampered and protected. His father, Henry VIII, showers him with affection, and the palace staff attends to all his needs and wants. After a chance encounter with Tom, a poor beggar boy, he is both horrified and amazed by his stories of life in awful court. He unwillingly trades identities with the pauper and learns the harsh realities of life. Dressed in Tom's rags, the prince is jeered as and is ill-treated by his subjects. Edward falls into the clutches of John Canty, who mistakes him to be his own son, that is Tom Canty. Tossed into a world of thieves and filthy beggars, he sees firsthand the sufferings and misery of the poor. Edward is rescued on several occasions by Miles Hendon, with whom he forges a deep bond of friendship. Edward vows to change the archaic and unjust laws that were prevalent during his father's reign. When Edward finally reclaims his crown, he rewards all those who have stood by him and punishes all wrongdoers. Edward is kind and a compassionate ruler during his time. He is responsible for amending many unjust laws. Mark Twain portrays Edward Tudor as a prince who goes through the experience of a pauper in order to emerge as a worthy king. Tom Canty is another major character. He is a poor beggar boy, the son of a drunkard, John Canty, who lives in a filthy slum called Awful Court in London. He is unlike his father in his nature and behavior. He accepts his miserable life because he thinks that everybody around him leads the same kind of life that he does. The only saving grace in Tom's life is Father Andrews, a kind old priest who teaches Tom to read and write and even learn Latin. He learns about kings and princes and soon becomes an expert on the royal ways and often escapes into dream world. His dream of actually becoming a prince comes true when he accidentally exchanges places with Edward, the Prince of Wales. Initially, we find that he is frightened and unfamiliar with the royal ways of being in the palace. But with his innate sensibility, he makes himself adjust to the royal court. He shows great wisdom and mercy in dispensing his royal duties, earning the admiration of his courtiers. Later, when Edward gets his crown back, he praises Tom for his just and merciful governance. Each of these characters is moral and righteous, demonstrating the qualities Twain values so highly. The characters are rewarded and loved for their morality. The novel teaches that living a life of integrity is the greatest attribute a person can have. We now discuss the minor characters that we come across in this novel. To begin with, it is first Miles Hendon. He is the second son of Sir Richard Hendon, a nobleman. Due to his younger brother Hugh Hendon's treachery, he is banished by his father. He serves out his probation by going to fight in wars abroad and is taken captive. Several years later, he escapes and returns to England to reclaim his rightful inheritance and marry his beloved Lady Edith. Hendon is courageous, lovable, protector and champion of the otherwise friendless Edward Tudor. He rescues Edward on several occasions and shows great kindness towards him, thereby earning his deep gratitude and respect. He is richly rewarded by the king, who makes him the Earl of Kent and punishes his treacherous brother Hugh Hendon. Miles Hendon marries his beloved Lady Edith and lives happily in Hendon Hall. Our next character is Father Andrews. He was a good old priest who inhabited the slum where Tom lived. He not only taught some of the neighborhood children in secret to read and write, but also taught them to distinguish between right and wrong. He showed special favor to Tom and even taught him a little bit of Latin, and the boy studied the languages wholeheartedly. John Canty is our next character, who is the father of Tom Canty. He is uneducated and uncultured, a ruffian and a drunkard who begs and steals for a living. He mistreats his wife and forces Tom Canty to live a miserable life by begging. He kills Father Andrews when the kind priest comes to rescue Edward Tudor. For this, he is forced to leave his house with his family to avoid arrest. John Canty joins a gang of ruffians and vagabonds and ill-treats Edward Tudor, whom he mistakes to be his son Tom Canty. Hugh Hendon is the next character. He is the brother of Miles Hendon. He is the youngest son of Sir Richard Hendon. Hugh Hendon is evil, he is mean, he is manipulative and vicious. He contrives to have his brother banished from home and forces Lady Edith to marry him. He forges a letter saying that Miles Hendon has been killed in a battle. When Miles returns to England, he pretends not to recognize him and forces Lady Edith to repudiate his claim. He once again betrays Miles and throws him into the prison. A satire is a work which mocks or ridicules human follies, vices, or shortcomings. According to Holman, the following developed meaning of satire is a literary manner in which the follies and foibles or vices and crimes of a person, mankind, or an institution are held up to ridicule or scorn with the purpose of correcting them. The object of satire is always to evoke, not merely evoke laughter, but for the purpose of correcting. Originally published in 1881, The Prince and the Pauper is one of Mark Twain's earliest social satires. With his caustic wit and biting irony, Twain satirizes the power of monarchy, unjust laws and barbaric punishment, superstitions and religious intolerance. The Prince and the Pauper is usually viewed as a child's story, but it offers adults a critical insight into people and the time period not really all that different from our own. The novel is a delightful satire on England's romantic past. It is a social satire, particularly compelling in its condemnation of the inequalities that existed between the classes, that is, the rich and the poor, in England at that time. The birth of Tom Canty and Edward Tudor itself shows the inequality that existed then. Edward led a royal and a luxurious life, whereas Tom lived his life which was full of hunger and squalor in a neglected part of London called Offalcourt. Dictatorship of the king, unjust laws, such as people who were accused of stealing anything worth more than 13 pence were to be hanged. Another example was of two women. Because of their religious beliefs, they were burned to stake. Lands were taken away, people were forced to beg, slavery, people were hanged and sentenced to death for petty crimes. Harsh conditions in the prison prevailed. The prisons were overcrowded with prisoners of the different sex and different ages as company. Superstitions were prevalent among much of the society. Witch trials continued throughout the year, and an extreme large gap continued to exist between England's rich and poor. The large middle portion of the novel largely focuses on Twain's social criticism of monarchy and any other form of government in which the common man is at the mercy of dictatorial authority. In these chapters, the prince experiences the life of the lowest stratum of English society as he tries to free himself from John Canty. He must fend for himself and make his way through the English countryside, which is filled with people who are hostile to anyone whom they do not know. Edward's experience, however, represents English lower class, harsh daily life that has no law enforcement, and they are always treated as oppressed community. Throughout this section, there is also an emphasis on disguises. Those disguises are used as a means of parody, of course. Twain focuses on the vagabonds who use disguises in order to dupe people who have more money than they have. After robbing, they successfully escape from the clutches of law. Those are the parody towards English social stratum. In addition, the above passage also describes the law enforcement towards English lower social class. The real King of England is now in one of his own prisons and is treated like a common prisoner. Prior to this scene, Miles Hendon said many times that a king should always be subjected to his own laws. Hendon, speaking for Twain, said that if laws are too severe for a king to be subjected to them, they are too severe for the king's subjects. If laws are good laws, then no person should be exempt from good and just laws. Young Edward is now at his lowest ebb, yet these experiences will cause him to vow to change all the cruel, unjust laws. Ironically, the surrogate king, Tom Canty, is now in the royal mansion, and he himself is already changing many of the things. It is clear that Twain's chief concern here is on the gross injustices which the king, like his subjects, must suffer. The remaining chapters of this novel are Mark Twain's core portion on the topics satirizing social class and political condition around the 1880s in England. In the field of social class, this novel mostly concerns itself with the motive of law enforcement throughout English society. Among others, Canty's life must be of paramount example used by Mark Twain to portray satirically English social condition in the year mentioned. Another basic idea is, of course, Twain's satiric expose of the concept that clothes make the man. When the two lads exchange clothes, the prince immediately becomes the pauper and is thus treated like a pauper, and likewise the pauper is treated like a prince merely because he is dressed in royal robes. The novel is a satire on the human folly of attempting to measure true worth by outer appearances. Twain has created a wonderful legacy of satire which is closely related to their social environment and life experiences. He was living in a period of social transition when the hypocrisy of capitalism was revealed and fully exposed. Besides, he had rich life experiences which help create masterpieces that demonstrate deeper understanding and perception of human nature, morality, and the capitalist society. Twain was a writer and humorist whose best work is characterized by broad, often irreverent humor or biting social satire. Twain's writing is also known for realism of place and language, memorable characters, and hatred of hypocrisy and oppression. Twain created work for the audience of America. His experience furnished him with a wide knowledge of humanity and a perfect grasp of local custom and speech that manifest so well in his writings. The Prince and the Pauper expresses the humanistic and progressive ideas of Mark Twain. However, it is also children's tale, since it is narrated in a simple style suited to the blunt moral perceptions of children. The innocence of the youthful protagonist, their uninhibited behavior, and their encounters with the adult world are amusingly unfurled in the story through Mark Twain's exceptional use of irony and humor. Satire or pessimism, all his characters face reality by his ironic humor, as in being ironic is negative and also surprising. In conclusion, whether a lesson in humility and moral realism or a real-life story with a twist, Twain found a way to entertain while teaching many lessons to his audience. Hope you enjoyed today's class. Thank you.